Hello, my name is Matt Spurnall, and I'm the Director of the Conflict, Security and Development Research Group at King's College London. On the occasion of the International Day for Mine Awareness and Assistance in Mine Action on the 4th of April, we decided to organize a special seminar looking at the history, evolution, and achievements of the Mine Action Program in Afghanistan. We invited four distinguished panelists, and I'd like briefly to introduce them to you. Our first speaker is Martin Barber, who is a former director of the United Nations Mine Action Program. And he is also an author of Blinded by Humanity, a story of the inside of the UN's humanitarian operations. Our second speaker is Mr. Mohammed Shafiq Yasufi, who is the current director of the Directorate of Mine Action Coordination in Afghanistan. He has been working with UN Mine Action since 2002, and in 2013 he was appointed to his current post. Our third speaker is Ms. Sohaila Hashemi. She's a communications and advocacy officer with the United Nations Mine Action Service in Afghanistan. She graduated from the American University of Afghanistan and joined UNMAS in 2019. Last but not least, we are joined by Mr. Daniel Bertoli, who is head of programs at the Danish demining group in Afghanistan. Since 2018, he has been leading the mine action component of the Danish Refugee Council's work in Afghanistan. I will not say much more, simply to welcome you all. I was reminded very firmly by Julia when we first talked about this that mine action, of course, is not just about mine clearance. Mine clearance, the surveying and mapping and demining is an important component, but it's only one. The others, of course, are mine risk reduction and assistance to victims, advocacy, an important advocacy role in relation to the various treaty instruments we have, and last but not least, stockpile destruction. And the origins of this, if you like, edifice of Mine Action Service goes right back to Afghanistan, and that's why it's so appropriate that we mark this special event by looking in detail at that history. So without further ado, can I ask Martin to start us off by providing us with a historical context or a historical overview, as it were, perspective on the HMA in Afghanistan.
Thank you very much indeed. And thanks to all those who are taking part. It's really great to be back amongst friends from Afghanistan. I want to take you back to the 15th of February, 1989. That was the day on which the last Soviet soldier left Afghanistan after 10 years of Soviet military presence in the country to return to the Soviet Union. At that time, there were more than 3 million Afghan refugees living in Pakistan and more than 3 million Afghan refugees living in Iran. And of course, with the departure of the Soviet troops, there was a tremendous hope and expectation that everybody would be able to return home. I was then working for the UN office coordinating humanitarian aid to Afghanistan, and I was based in Pakistan. And we knew that the towns and villages to which these Afghan refugees wanted to return were heavily contaminated with anti-personnel landmines. Now, there was no previous experience anywhere in the world for the UN of managing what has come to be called a mine action program. So we were starting completely from scratch. And indeed, we weren't absolutely sure that anybody would accept that mine clearance was a humanitarian task. many people thought that it was a military task. So we started by organizing training for more than 10,000 Afghan volunteers in Pakistan, refugees, in the basic techniques of mine clearance, locating and destroying landmines. We also started some basic mine awareness courses, since become mine risk education. And so we were preparing to support the return of Afghan refugees to their villages. It soon became clear that the training of Afghan volunteers was not sufficient. So we identified initially 5 leading Afghan personalities and invited them each to manage a new Afghan NGO dedicated to one or other aspect of mine action. So we had one doing surveys, we had 2 doing mine clearance, we had 1 doing mine awareness, and we had 1 doing survey and training and monitoring. And they were soon joined by another organization working with mine detecting dogs. Now, we started with 2 small teams of 30 men each, working in the province of Kunar on the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan. And that went quite well. And one day, a colleague came to me and said, Martin, look what the ICRC is saying about our program. And this was a press report that the International Committee of the Red Cross had said, if the UN continues going so slowly with their mine clearance program in Afghanistan, it will take 1,200 years to complete. So we were a bit shocked by this, but we soon realized that actually it was a blessing in disguise, because what it meant was that the ICRC accepted that mine clearance was a humanitarian activity. And those who had said that the UN should not be doing mine clearance remained silent. And this persuaded a number of governments, donor governments, to provide funding for humanitarian mine action, which they had been unwilling to do up until then. And so very quickly the numbers expanded, and within 2 or 3 years, the mine action program was employing over 8,000 Afghans, undertaking mainly mine clearance operations. Now, how was it organized? So each of these 5 Afghan NGOs, their directors were joined by our United Nations Mine Action Program manager as part of the management team of this operation. And the operation came to be known as the Mine Action Program for Afghanistan, MAPA. And there were 3 key principles that were established at the outset of the MAPA. The first was that if it was going to be a humanitarian program, then it needed to conform with the humanitarian principles of impartiality and neutrality. So we established a principle that if an area was to be cleared of mines, all the parties to the conflict must agree that those mines were no longer in use everybody must agree that those mines could be removed. Because if one side to the conflict thought that those mines were still useful to their military objectives, then if we removed them, we were effectively going to be taking part in the conflict. The second principle was that all the organizations in the mine action program must adopt the same standard operating procedures and the same terms and conditions of employment of their staff. So that was developed, put together and monitored within the context of the management of the program under the UN program manager. And the third was that in order to guarantee for donors that their money was being used effectively, we had very close oversight of the financial and administrative operations of those 5 Afghan NGOs. And they were regularly audited. And I have to say that some years, the NGOs' audit reports were better than the UN's own audit reports. So what can one conclude from that? Oh, and I should just say also, just briefly, that there were 2 other key elements from the perspective of the Afghan deminers. One was that we were able to provide insurance cover so that if a deminer was injured or lost their lives, the family or the deminer would receive a payment from the insurance company. These were not huge payments, but they were very important to the affected families. And the second was that if there was an accident and a deminer was injured, the UN aircraft would always go immediately to pick them up, bring them to Peshawar, to the hospital there, for the best possible treatment. And occasionally, senior ambassadors were left stranded in cities in Afghanistan, had to spend an extra night because their plane was diverted. Nobody ever complained. So what can we conclude? I think we could conclude that if the 3 principles that I just elaborated were adopted and maintained, then donors could, with confidence, support a program implemented by local organizations, by Afghan NGOs in this case, with assurance that their money would be well spent. What happened subsequently, of course, was that, and I'm not saying that this was by any means a bad thing, it was very beneficial in many countries. A number of new international NGOs were established to do mine action, the different aspects of mine action that Professor Badal indicated at the beginning. And of course, Western donors tend to prefer to put their money into their own national organizations rather than support local organizations in a country like Afghanistan. So when mine action programs began in Cambodia and Mozambique and Angola, most of the operations there were managed by international NGOs rather than by local organizations. I should say, just in conclusion, that when we started in Afghanistan in 1990, the one international NGO that was already there had also just set up was the Halo Trust, and they maintained their operations. they coordinated their activities with the Afghan groups and the UN program, but they maintained their independent operation in the Somali plain north of Kabul and in Pulikumri. As I understand now, their operations have grown quite substantially. But for the first few years, the program was dominated by Afghan NGOs. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an introductory context of the mine action program in Afghanistan. Back to you, Matt.
Thank you so much, Martin, and thank you also for sticking admirably to the time. Let's move straight on to Shafiq Yusufi, please.
Can I have a feedback from Julia? Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yeah, it's perfect. I can see civilian.
Okay, thank you very much. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the King's College London Department of War Studies for inviting myself to provide some information about the achievements and also the level of contamination in Afghanistan. And I'm very happy to see or to hear that the college is celebrating the 4th of April, the International Day for Mine Action. Mr. Martin Barber, he explained about the history of Mine Action Program of Afghanistan. I do not want to touch too much on the history. I will talk more about the current status of a humanitarian mine action program in Afghanistan. A little bit the history of conflict very quickly. The fighting started in Afghanistan in 1979 with the invasion of former Soviet Union troops. Before that, nobody even knew about the mines. Fighting continued. Lots of areas in Afghanistan contaminated by landmines. And after Soviet Union withdrawal, the Soviet-backed regime, they also continued fighting with Mujahideen. Again, areas contaminated. During the internal conflict in 1992, the scale of problem get bigger and bigger. During the Taliban time, there was fighting between the Taliban and Northern Alliance. Again, areas of Afghanistan contaminated by landmines and explosive remnants of war. And since 2001, with the presence of international troops in Afghanistan and their fight against terrorism in Afghanistan, areas are contaminated either by ERW or by homemade mines, which we call it victim operated IEDs, those types of mines that we are gathering information about. The Mine Action Program of Afghanistan, as Mr. Martin also indicated, established in 1989. Currently, 40 plus organizations are working in this program. Some of them are non-for-profit organizations, some of them are commercial demining firms. Currently, about 6,000 demining personnel are working under this program. If we compare it with 2011, which the Mine Action Program of Afghanistan receiving the peak funding, nowadays 57% reduction is happened with the Mine Action manpower. This is our vision. I put this picture about Afghanistan. This is a famous place in center of Afghanistan, Bamyan. There, I think there was the tallest Buddha statue there. In March 2001, the Taliban, when they were ruling Afghanistan, they destroyed this statue. Just the hole is left, remained, the statue, and some other small statues have been demolished here. This is the map which showing the status of contamination. All those red dots representing a minefield. And those areas which are colored green, they are the districts which have been entirely cleared and handed over to the beneficiaries. So the green districts are totally cleared now. Since the beginning of MAPA, 114 districts and 3,140 communities cleared entirely. As a result, over 20 million different types of explosive ordnance, including landmines, explosive remnants of war, cluster munitions, and victim-operated IEDs have been destroyed. Parallel to demining operations, rescue education have been provided to vulnerable people in the communities using different approaches, direct sessions, through media, or through UNHCR transitional centers. We also have some progress regarding victim assistance services provided to 400,000 people by MAPA. Other ministries are also providing support to victims, but this is specifically attributed to MAPA activities. Unfortunately, civilian casualties as a result of accident related to landmines and explosive remnants of war, and also victim-operated IEDs. It is very high in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, Afghanistan, according to the Landmine Monitor, has the highest number of civilian casualties globally within the countries affected by landmines and ERW. About 60% of civilian casualties are attributed to accident of victim-operated IEDs. We also use the term improvised mines or anti-personnel mines of improvised nature. It is homemade, used by non-state actors, by the Taliban, and also by the IS. 39%, more than 39% of civilian casualties attributed to explosive remnants of war. So see that the problem of landmine in ERW is getting increased day by day. Since 2001, fighting has been continuing in Afghanistan. Wherever fights happen, there are some explosive ordnance remain unexploded. So it causes a threat and also harm to civilians. Only 1% of the civilian casualties attributed to the industrial mine, which are belonging to the conflicts pre-2001. This is one picture from a family. As a result of ERW accident, 7 children of the same family, they have lost either 2 legs or 1 leg. This is an indication, a small example of problem in Afghanistan. The nature of contamination in Afghanistan, it is challenging because there is not records of mines where they are used. Most of the time, it is used by different parties. It is used randomly. Some areas are contaminated by minimum metal contents mine, which is difficult for detecting. Some areas, depth of mine is higher and also causing a challenge ahead of the mining organizations to detect and discover. It is used indiscriminately, unfortunately. Nowadays, the victim-operated IEDs are the weapon of choice by anti-government elements in Afghanistan. They put it everywhere. However, they are putting it against military convoy or against military personnel. but unintended target of such devices, little devices, sometimes it is civilians which are traveling from one location to another by car or by any other transportation means. The Taliban and anti-government elements, they are using different techniques. There are some pictures. Sometimes they are connecting it with batteries. Sometimes they are putting an anti-personnel mine on top of a big homemade or IED. So it is always causing problem on local people. We have now different types of demining tools. We have manual demining tools, which are using detector, mine detection dogs, mechanical. In terms of risk education, as I mentioned earlier, we do risk education through direct sessions as well, media and other means. DMAC. I am the director of DMAC. DMAC is a directorate of the National Disaster Management Authority. We are the regulatory body for humanitarian mine action program in Afghanistan. What we are doing is listed here. We are actually program manager of the humanitarian mine action in Afghanistan. We also do coordination, resource mobilization, advocacy, and communication, information management. We also do quality management and planning and priority setting. So we had a plan to complete Afghanistan by 2023 based on the Article 5 of the Ottawa Convention. But due to many reasons, including shortage of funding, insecurity, we are not going to achieve that by March 2023. We are preparing another extension request that we will request another 7-year extension for our deadline. In total, there will be 470 square kilometer area contaminated will be left uncleared by March 2023. And we are going to continue it until 2030. We are also going to publish the new strategic mine action strategic plan. The strategic plan, which was expired by end of March 2021. It had 4 strategic goals. Up to 90% we achieved those objectives with this previous strategy. The new strategy, 1 goal is added. We have 5 strategic goals: life-saving, victim assistance, sustainable development goals. You know that mine action is a prerequisite for implementation of development projects. We considered 1 goal, how mine action can support implementation of development projects at national level. Gender and diversity mainstreaming, advocacy and coordination. Our areas of focus for the future, we have put some of them here, some of the most important ones. In terms of capacity building, previously humanitarian mine action program didn't clear those areas which are contaminated by victim operating IEDs. It was always considered that it is a military business or it is a military task. Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Defense, they also have their demining units. But taking into consideration the high number of civilian casualties that we are observing, we tried to advocate for engaging humanitarian demining capacity for survey and clearance of 1 type of IEDs, which is pressure pellet IED or victim operated IEDs, because based on the definition of the Ottawa Convention, it is considered anti-personnel mine. We are also going to do a nationwide survey to identify the scale of contamination after 2001, which mainly include victim-operated IEDs and explosive remnants of war. We will do the clearance of victim-operated IEDs. We are trying, we have already started to identify synergies, get engaged with other sectors to use their capacities for clearance or survey of areas from mines in ERW. We have been in contact with Ministry of Defense and Interior, Protocol 5 of the CCW Convention on Conventional Weapons. It obliges all parties in conflict to clear explosive ordnance from the fighting zones. So if we can have the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Interior to effectively clear the fighting zones, there will be some support and will release some pressure from the shoulder of the MAPA. We're also trying to identify and search for new technologies. The funding is getting declined day by day. We want to cover some of those financial gap by introduction of new technologies that can make the work of demining more efficient. We also have been engaged, in the past, there were 2 times demining organizations recruited ex-combatants. So there is peace negotiation ongoing in Istanbul. There will be another peace negotiation between the Taliban and the government of Afghanistan. We have submitted a project proposals. There is about 30% of the Afghan territory which is contaminated by demining teams cannot go because of insecurity. As soon as the peace is established, we hope that we can access those areas, and we are hoping that some countries will fund that proposal that we have already submitted to them. There are a couple of challenges that have been always impeding delivery of mine action services. Ongoing conflicts, it is adding to the existing problem. Areas are recontaminated, or new areas are contaminated by landmines and also by ERW. In some areas, access to contaminated areas is difficult. Non-state parties demand illegal taxation from implementing partners. The big problem nowadays in Afghanistan is victim-operated IEDs. The anti-government elements place it anywhere they wish. Sport ERW is another problem. Sometimes children picking them, playing with them, or due to poverty, they collect piece of metals. Sometimes they do not distinguish between dangerous and safe items. However, risk education is an ongoing process parallel to demining. There are some pictures of impact of victim-operated IEDs, which has went off on vehicles transporting local people. In one accident, we remember that 34 civilians killed on the way from Herat to Kandahar. So this is actually a big challenge nowadays in front of us. And thank you so much. I hope I was able to stick with the time, 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Shafiq, for a wonderful, clear overview of the challenges you're still facing. Thank you so much. Let's move straight on to Sohaila, and people will no doubt be writing down their questions. Sohaila.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me in this wonderful event. And thank you for Mr. Martin and Mohammed Shafiq for the wonderful presentation. So I'm going to start my presentation with talking about the current role of UN mass in Afghanistan. So let me share my screen. Okay. So, as you might all know that in 2018, UN mass transited and delegated all leading roles of mine action program of Afghanistan to the DMAC, the Director of Mine Action Coordination Office. And since then, UNMAS role is mainly the technical and financial assistance to the DMAC, as well as the implementing partners, which are the local and international NGOs in Afghanistan in the MAPA, in order to ensure that the mine action sector in Afghanistan is coordinated effectively. Here I have listed the major activities areas that we do. For example, the strategic planning, the advocacy activities that UNMAS do, and the resource mobilization and technical advisory, as well as the funds management. So in order to understand the role of UNMAS in mine action program better, here I can show you this diagram that shows the relationship between the UNMAS and the national director, which is DMAC. As here you can see, and there are the mutual arrows, which shows our mutual relationship. We assisted DMAC in terms of capacity building, technical assistance in developing the annual and national strategies, and we do many shared advocacy works. At the same time, in our activities, we need the DMAC. For example, DMAC owns the IMSMA, which is the data center. And you might know that in mine action, the management of data is extremely important. So, and currently DMAC has the role of managing the data, and we receive our data from DMAC for our advocacy activities. And then here you see that DMAC has the leading role on the MAPA. In the below, this is the logo of Mine Action Program of Afghanistan. And as well as on the other side, we have our relationship with the implementing partners. We support them in terms of capacity building, as well as some direct grants and projects to them. Here are some examples of our recent supports and activities in Afghanistan. First thing is the Abundant Improvised Mine AIM of Afghanistan Mine Action Strategy, which is called AIM-MS. This strategy was developed in coordination with GMAC and the technical assistance of UNMAS in order to ensure the AIM projects are coordinated effectively based on this strategy, which helps DMAC and other national authorities in prioritization and quality control of AIM areas and AIM projects. I need to mention that this standard is one of its first kinds among the other countries who have active mine action programs. The second one is the AIM clearance training. This training was in 2020, last year, and it was also one of its first training in the country. As you might know, the rate of AIM casualties has really increased in Afghanistan. So we really saw the need to organize this training and build the capacity of the local organization in mine action program to be able to survey and at the same time clear the AIM contaminations in Afghanistan. The third example is the access negotiations. You might know that in mine and clearance programs, community liaison is extremely important. It is very important to have good relationship with local communities of the beneficiary or the contaminated areas. For this purpose, UNMAS provided specialized and well-trained access negotiation officers for the implementing partners or the local organizations who do the clearance projects in the field. We also provide updated access negotiation skills and workshops to ensure the quality of their work. The next one is the National Disability Strategy. As you might know, one of the major pillars of UNMAS is victim assistance and the mines and explosive victims in Afghanistan in order to ensure the social inclusion and well-being of this category of people. UNMAS has hired specialist inclusion and access specialist in order to work with the related national authorities and government of Afghanistan to develop a new national disability strategy. And currently it's under process of finalizing. And one of the last examples I want to mention is the gender mainstreaming. One of the major priorities of UNMAS in Afghanistan is to enhance the gender equality in mine action of program of Afghanistan. And one of the most recent activities that we had was providing national gender focal points for all the local implementing partners and local organizations in mine action sector of Afghanistan, and train them in order to enhance the gender equality in this sector. And now I want to focus on one of the best or the most significant achievements of a mine action program of Afghanistan, which is having the first female deminers in the history of Afghanistan. I need to mention that this project of recruiting female deminers started in 2018. About 18 women from Bamiyan province of Afghanistan was recruited, trained to become deminers. And out of them, 14 of them were actually started their work through a project implemented by the Danish demining group in 2018. As a result of this project, more than 55,000 square meters was cleared from the landmines in Bamiyan, which was a big achievement in the history of Afghanistan. After that project, in 2019, the second stage of clearance started, in which 16 female deminers started working in this project of clearing 3 hazardous areas, which comprised the 139,000 square meters of the minefields and 314,000 of battlefields in Bamiyan. It was released through clearance and survey. And to give you more updates about the female deminers of Afghanistan, currently several of them are working on, and this project started in 2020 and currently still it is going on in 2021. Now let me get your attention on a recent Percy 21, which is on the Afghanistan female deminers perception study. It is a joint work of GICHD, Danish Refugee Council, Danish Demining Group, DMAC, and also UNMAS. This perception study was based on the quantitative questions from baseline, which was before or at the start of the 2019 clearance project that I mentioned, and the end line, which was at the end of the project in 2019. And in this research, the average of respondents was from both baseline and end line was 92 respondents. And we selected, or the sample of respondents was very specific. It was the female deminers themselves, the male team members of the female deminers who worked with the female deminers, the family members of the female deminers, and the community members who live in neighborhood of the female deminers in the Bamiyan. I need to mention all our respondents because our focus was in the Bamiyan province, and all the respondents was from or living in the Bamiyan and the districts around it. This perception study, it focused on three themes and three perceptions. The first one was the perception of female deminers and how they see themselves, how they feel, or what is their perception towards your own job. Second was the resource management in the family, how it changed their role in the family from financially or other aspects, as well as the decision making or their role and their situation in their local communities in the society. So we came up with very interesting findings, and you can read the whole findings in the perception study, which is available for public in the internet. However, here I am going to share with you very few of them. One of the major ones was that after the project that women have the strength and the ability to work as a deminer. And comparing to the start of the project, there was an increase in the confidence of the ability of women working as deminer. On the other hand, there was a decrease in the belief among female deminers that demining is not a dangerous job, from 40% into the 14% in the end line. So in other words, before the projects, the female deminers were thinking that it's not really a dangerous job. But after experiencing it, majority of them believe that demining is a dangerous job for a woman. And the other trend that we find out was that comparing to men, more women were concerned about this job, and more women were thinking that demining is a dangerous job for women comparing to the men's perspective. The next finding that I would like to mention is that among the family members of the female deminers that were interviewed, 100% of them believe that women are able to be deminers. They are strong enough to be deminers. Comparing to the before or the baseline survey before the project, which was among men, there was 78%, and the female family members, 67% before the start of project. So here you can see an increase in the belief and confidence of the family members and relatives about the capacity of women working in male-dominated jobs and male-dominated working area. And the next finding is that about the efficiency or work productivity of the female deminers. The percentage of men who strongly agreed that female deminers are less efficient than the male colleagues dropped from 13% to 0% by end of the project. This is a very interesting finding. So in other words, I can say before the project, men were thinking that having female colleagues as deminer is going to be a trouble for them, or it's not as efficient as having male deminer. However, after accomplishment of objective has changed and they realized that women can be as productive as men in the demining field. I need to mention that prior to this study, Danish demining group has also have done a study about the productivity rate, and they also realized that they are no different than the male deminers in the field, which is a very interesting finding. So if you are interested to read more about this study, you can search it in the Google or find it in a UN Mass website. I think it has been published in the websites of our other partners who has a part in this study. I need to mention, although we have that and very specified, and some of the findings might need for further research for units disagreed or strongly disagreed more than female colleagues that demining is too dangerous for a woman by end of the project, or why women were thinking that demining is more dangerous comparing to men. And another, why female community members who either agreed or strongly disagreed that demining is not appropriate for women increased during the data collection. So there are some questions and some trends that we found that there is a need for further research and further studies for this topic. So this was all from me. If you have any question, please do not hesitate to ask in the QA section. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suhaila. That's very, very thorough overview. We'll go straight on to Daniel. So, Daniel, go ahead.
Thanks very much, Matt, and good afternoon to everyone. I'll just bring up my presentation. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's a real honor for myself and for DRC to be included on this panel. It's a real honor for us, and I'll move ahead from the NGO perspective. I think the other panelists have really given a good overview of the situation, both in the past, the current, and I can provide some of the implementation side of things as well. So in terms of DRC, also known as the Danish Demining Group, we've been on the ground in Afghanistan since 1999. So we're in fact one of the younger operators. We conduct the full package of mine action activities, including survey, clearance, risk education, and generally we work on what has been defined as pre-2001 legacy contamination. So as what was mentioned, so that's Soviet-Afghan war and the 90s Civil War contamination. So that's legacy factory-made mines. But we've also been clearing a lot of UXO post-2001. Up until this point, we haven't so much engaged on the abandoned improvised mine, otherwise known as victim-operated IEDs. But I'll get onto that in a moment about what our position is on that. we're given the experience of the program and the map more generally, our engagement and our program is 99% Afghan led, and including the senior management. And basically we put a strong emphasis on integration, gender mainstreaming, innovation, quality, partnerships, and of course safety. So that's our approach and our strategic thinking behind our role in Afghanistan as an international NGO. So some of our achievements over the last 20 years, as Ms. Suhaila explained, there was the female demining project that we were fortunate to implement, and we're very proud of it. A decade ago, I think a lot of people would have said that that was something that was highly unlikely to happen, and we managed it and then followed it up with 2 further projects. So I think this really reflects a kind of broader trend in mine action sector and the greater involvement of women throughout the sector, including technical roles, and that's something that we're looking at continuing to develop going forward. Specific to DRC, but also with other implementing partners, we are very much engaged in taking forward, and some of the stuff we've done in the past is cross-sectoral humanitarian and development work. So that examples of that could be cash for work to facilitate usage of cleared land after it's been inactive for many years. It could be risk education, emergency distribution points that are close to areas of contamination and minefields. It could also be vocational training for the deminers themselves, so that they, after the land is cleared, that they can find possible career opportunities, or for the people working on the land so that they can best put that land into use. So we've delivered in-house animal husbandry training, vocational training, English language training, for example, to deminers, a whole broad package of different interventions that really link and cut across the whole humanitarian and development sector. So as Mr. Shafiq referenced, mine action is often a prerequisite for other interventions. So we really do take it in that direction, and our activities are driven by level of impact and the casualty rates. That's really what defines all MAPA IPs, prioritization. Obviously, there's many thousands of meters squared remaining to be cleared, and it's important that that's prioritized in a manner that's appropriate, that achieves the most impact over time. So we work closely with both the DMAC and the different authorities, as well as the communities in which we work. We recruit heavily from the local communities to ensure that we benefit from local knowledge, and we develop strong relationships with them. And then on top of that, the local communities can prioritize the tasking situation in their own community. So for example, if there's a water well that might need to be demined, then that can be demined first, and we can work on that basis. I mean, I think it's been really exciting and interesting for me to hear from the other speakers about the uniqueness of the MAPA, and I think it really is a unique mine action program amongst other countries, given the experience that's present in it. A number of personnel have been working in it for 20, 15, 30, 25 years. And there's a real sense of each organization having that unique expertise and added value. And there's some real meaningful cooperation and coordination taking place across the sector. It's often referenced as the MAPA family, with the different INGOs and NGOs working very closely together across the country. So going back to my point on integrated programming, I think this is a pretty interesting example of a project we've been implementing as DRC DDG since late 2018. So basically the backstory of this is that when we were delivering mine risk education in the northern part of Afghanistan, near the city of Mazar Sharif, we discovered a village where the villagers, owing to lack of resources, but also building materials, had built their houses using BM-21 rockets to basically reinforce the structure of the house. So rather than using steel girders or wooden beams, the villagers were close to this depot that had exploded in the mid-90s, kicking out all of these rockets, and they picked them up and built them into their houses as door and window lintels in ceilings and floors, reinforcement of walls. So I think that the challenge was, when we went to the village, the villagers quite rightly said, look, we're not going to allow you to remove these rockets and damage our houses without some kind of compensation or rebuilding the house. And we couldn't remove the rockets safely without some kind of damage. So what we did was we found two different, very different sources of funding, one for the rocket removal, which went ahead, and one for the reconstruction. And DRC did that in-house with some expertise in terms of civil engineering and cash grants expertise to ensure that the work was done in line with the expectations of the villagers, but was also safe, and then remove the rockets. The project's continuing to go on, as over time more and more villagers have come forward in different parts of the district as well, and we're expecting over 1,000 rockets to be removed and over 100 houses to be rebuilt. But I think basically the kind of case study demonstrates that mine action has a broad range of involvement in different humanitarian interventions, and it doesn't necessarily fit the classic image of a deminer in a field. So there's a lot of linkages that we need to make happen, and it's an opportunity and a trend that's been going on in the last 10 or so years, not only in Afghanistan but across the sector. So some of the trends and opportunities going forward, we're going to continue to look at integration with other sectors. There are obviously a lot of competing needs, not only in Afghanistan but across the sector, across other countries where mine action is taking place, and linking them makes perfect sense. The key challenge currently in Afghanistan is humanitarian access, as some of the other panelists mentioned. You can kind of break that down into two different ways. Access denial, basically through active conflict, where the risk is unacceptable for myself and my colleagues to work in, and then also access denial through armed opposition groups demanding taxation or registration in a kind of quasi-state manner that NGOs and INGOs simply can't comply with. So I think linked to what Mr. Shafiq was saying, one of the kind of key things on the humanitarian community's radar is these negotiations taking place in Doha and also in Moscow and Istanbul with the Taliban, and that the outcome of those will everyone is obviously watching very closely, and will likely have a significant impact on the way that operations, mine action operations, but generally the humanitarian community works going forward. I think it's interesting to note that all IPs worked throughout the Taliban regime from 96 to 2001, including DRC, who obtained their initial registration during that time. So whatever the outcome, we'll be here to deliver and to continue to clear. And mine action is a little bit more insulated due to a perceived level of neutrality. Of course, as an organization, DRC and other NGOs working in the community are committed to the humanitarian principles, including neutrality and humanity, independence and impartiality. But there will be opportunities going forward for different actors, and including a possible involvement of mine action in DDR processes that might come down along the line, and also abandoned improvised mine clearance engagement resulting from the peace in certain areas. That's it from me. So thank you very much once again for the opportunity. I pass it back to Mats.
Thank you so much for another excellent and fascinating presentation. It's been very, very rich and very interesting. And I'm going to abuse the privilege of chairing by asking 2 questions and then opening up for other comments. And I want to take advantage of the fact that we do have a long history here, and a kind of historical perspective can be adopted. The questions are slightly different, and I invite anyone to perhaps address them. The first goes back to something you mentioned, Shafiq. I am very interested in the points you made about technological developments. I mean, technology can be an enemy, technology can be a friend. And listening to you, particularly when you talked about the major concern now being improvised explosive devices, I assume that technology has moved on this front and may have made things more challenging and more difficult for you. On the other hand, there are new technologies, which I said, which you mentioned there wasn't enough funding for. I mean, what kind of developments do you see going forward here? Can technological developments facilitate make your job easier, or are the trends such that it's making it difficult? As you know, in other aspects of warfare now, there is much focus on drones, for example, which introduces a whole new dimension to warfare. And I'm curious what you think of how the technology has moved over time. Martin might also, and Daniel, of course, might also have views on that. The other question is perhaps very difficult to answer. It's in the nature of the question, I suppose, and that really has to do with what you might call the advocacy side of your work, and particularly your efforts to monitor the status of treaty implementation. And what I'm curious about is whether you can in any way assess the significance and importance of the Ottawa Treaty for the kind of work that you are doing. I mean, that treaty has many aspects to it, one of which, of course, is production and transfer of anti-personnel mines. I think you mentioned that improvised explosive devices come in under the treaty, but I'm curious whether the significance of the treaty is mostly to be felt at what you might call the normative side of it, that there's an understanding that anti-personnel mines is illegal and shouldn't be used, or whether you've also seen another effect of the Ottawa Treaty. That is a difficult, like all international treaties, it's a very difficult question to answer, but I'm curious what your sense on the ground is of the significance of that treaty. I don't know who wants to start, whether Martin or Shafiq or wanted to comment on either one of those 2 questions.
Well, I think we want to hear from Shafiq a very brief word on technology, because I'm absolutely not up to date with the most modern technology. But just to say that when we were starting the program, all kinds of people would come up with fantastic ideas about wonderful technologies which were going to solve our problems, like massively powerful water hoses, until we pointed out that shortages of water and electricity might make these a little impractical. So we were more frequently presented with technology which wasn't going to work than with a technology that did. On the treaty, I do think that the treaty has had a phenomenal impact on the understanding about landmines. Some of you may yesterday have been listening to Heidi Kuhn from Roots of Peace, in another King's College webinar, who was inspired to generate support from California wine makers by the passage of the Ottawa Treaty in 1997. My one doubt about the Ottawa Treaty has always been Article 5, which requires all areas to be cleared, because it has always seemed to me that governments should be able to decide that some areas there simply isn't a benefit to clearing them because it'll be more costly and dangerous to clear them than to leave them marked and so on. But I always lost this argument when having it with the lawyers, and maybe they were right and I was wrong. But I do think that the obligation to clear every single landmine is onerous, and in some countries may not be practical. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Shafiq.
Professor, as the first question was more relevant to Afghanistan, I think personally that in mine action sector, in terms of technology, we didn't progress very well, not only in case of Afghanistan, but globally. There are clear reasons for that. As far as I remember, working more than 24 years with the program, we have been using 3 types of demining tool, mechanical, manual, and dog. So manual, they are using a metal detector. The survey currently is mainly relying on information gathered from local people. Local people can be, it can be quantitative, but maybe less qualitative, because it is based on the level of information that informants or interviewees provide to survey teams. For defining the exact boundary of the hazardous areas, there is always lack of efficiency. Maybe in Afghanistan, we have spotted that, and we are trying to identify some sort of solutions that can scan the ground. Technology can see 100 meters of the ground depth, but there should be some sort of a scanning or aerial system that can scan and identify those areas where mines are existing. Sometimes operators are clearing big areas, but no mines or less number of mines are found here. So there is elements of cost and time. Both are very important. There are about 300 square kilometers contaminated by anti-vehicle mines, and all areas are flatlands. It is a priority for us, but we cannot clear that until we do not clear that until we identify a best service solution and clearance solution for that. The victim-operated IEDs, that is another challenge. It is very scattered. You can expect anywhere. So this is big mass. I mean, there are containers, there is different types of stuff that non-state actors use. So it should be easy to identify a solution for that to better make use of them. This is my understanding. I agree with Mr. Martin Barber. The convention has a very big impact because many countries, those who are in a position to donate or to fund the low-income countries like Afghanistan, some of them, they are already member of the convention. So they feel some sort of, responsibility to support other countries because there is a provision within the Ottawa Treaty, which is promoting the cooperation and assistance. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Daniel, did you want to comment on any of that?
Yes, yeah. I agree to an extent that we're not really where we should be, perhaps, in terms of embracing technology. I think we're a little bit behind the curve, although that we have made significant progress in terms of efficiency and economy over the last 20 or so years, in terms of releasing land more quickly and with greater certainty. A lot of the detectors we now use are far more advanced than we would have used 20 or 30 years ago, and much safer for the deminer as well. They're employing ground penetrating radar and also looking at detectors that can detect minimum metal mines as well. So there have been technological advances, and I have seen use of drones in other programs across the world. But yeah, there's still some way to go. But in summary, there have been significant gains in terms of reducing the dollar per square meter in the last 20 years. I think it's somewhere hovering around 80 cents a square meter, currently 60 cents a square meter, whereas 20 or 30 years ago, you might have been upwards of $2 or $3 a square meter. So there have been contributions in that sense from technology.
Thank you very much. We have a question from Enrique Garbino, and maybe you introduce yourself, Enrique, as well, with your own background. I think you have a connection to the Swedish demining service.
Hey, I hope you can hear me well. Actually, I don't have a connection with the Swedish demining center. My background is actually as an EOD officer in the Brazilian army, and also as a weapon contamination delegate with the RCRC in Ukraine. But currently, I am a PhD student at the Swedish Defense University, and that's the link with Sweden. I'm really interested in the nexus between mine action and DDR programs. It was mentioned by at least two of the panelists, and thanks a lot for the great presentations and discussions. Really, really insightful. And I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit more on this nexus between mine action and DDR, based on the experience in the early 2000s in Afghanistan with the ex-Mujahideen fighters, and also the prospects of the current peace process, and if there's something envisaged renewal of this program somehow. As I see it, there are benefits and also some kind of challenges to overcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shafiq, do you want to start with that?
If you allow me, yes, very briefly. As a measure of confidence building, I think mine action has played a role in terms of peace and reintegration of ex-combatants during the disarmament, demobilization and reintegration program, which we called it DDR, sometime 2002, 2004. And there were many ex-combatants which they laid their weapons down. They were absorbed by demining organizations, because mine action is not a very complicated field. It needs a couple of months training. So in terms of provision of training and mobilization, it is easier. And it is also a little bit has similarity with military. So those ex-combatants, they prefer to come in terms of reintegration into the society. They prefer to be within or to work with mine action compared to other vocational training like tailoring, like carpentry, something. So the experience has shown that mine action was successful. Training were provided for them during the training of demining. There were some other vocational training also provided for them. If they finish with mine action sometime, then they can do their life with other vocational experience they had. And we look forward to the result of peace negotiation. First, there is about 30% of the contaminated areas, if we can say about 400 square kilometers areas, which have priorities but cannot be accessed because of insecurity, At that time, we can access there, and there are lots of Taliban that can be recruited by the mining organizations at that time, I hope.
Thank you very much. Can I turn to Carolina? I think you had a question, touches on the question of neutrality. Are you able to unmute, Carolina?
Hi, yes, good afternoon. Sorry
Good
about
afternoon.
my camera is not working.
No problem.
Thank you. I'm a master's student from the Graduate Institute in Geneva, and my specialization is actually on engaging with non-state armed groups. And I'm Colombian, and also given by the Colombian experience, I would like to know how is the engagement with the non-state armed groups to identify the areas that need to be clear, or is it always through a governmental institution? Because probably it also contains quite a lot of negotiation and previous work with non-state armed groups before actually doing the mine action programs and putting them into execution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting question of how you engage with non-state armed group. Who wants to start? I suppose all of you may have views on that. Daniel or Shafiq?
Just very quickly, then maybe Daniel, which is actually they are implementing the mining activities in Afghanistan. So fortunately, taking into consideration the neutral nature of humanitarian mine action in Afghanistan, they can access every places, and if there isn't any live fighting ongoing, because mine action has been working through different regimes during the Mujahideen, then the Taliban, now during the new administration. And there are cases where the mining organizations are working, but it is not under control of the government, or it is an area which is not known whether it is controlled by government or anti-government elements. But the mining teams can go because they are neutral and they have a good fame. They have a good reputation. Secondly, there are some institutions like Afghan ban landmine campaign that they can sometimes negotiate with anti-government elements through communities, and also direct negotiation with them. United Nations, maybe UNMAS can comment on that. They also have a channel that can get access or negotiate for clearance of those areas which are located under the control of them.
Daniel, did you want to add to that? You've been dealing with them in the field.
Yes, yeah. So this is quite a hot topic right now in Afghanistan, I think globally, about working in non-state actor areas. So, but certainly when we conduct in line with the humanitarian principles, we go where we're driven by the casualty rates. So and the priority of an impact of those locations. So we don't, as long as it's safe to go to those locations and the risk is acceptable, then we will go. In terms of gathering information, of course, we'll try and speak to all actors present in that area. We're not going to exclude voices, but we do need to ensure our colleagues are safe. But as Mr. Shafiq mentioned, mine action in Afghanistan is well accepted by all parties to the conflict. So really where it's possible to gain access, we definitely will work, and we will ensure that we speak to everyone as well. So but the central database does lie with the DMAC, and information that we gather is then reported and compiled by the DMAC as well. So we gather that information from the field and then pass it to the DMAC for tasking to operators. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I wonder whether if either Martin or Sohaila want to add anything to the
sorry, Mats, we have Mohammed Vakil,
Okay.
who's the deputy director of the UNMOS. And let me, yeah, I think you're on mute, Mohammed Vakil.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you, Julia, and everyone. So it is an interesting question. I would like to add that Afghanistan has a 10 years operation plan based on the Ottawa Treaty. That plan covers all Afghanistan, so there is no differences where the project should be implemented. And that plan is based on a number of criteria prioritized and provided the direction for the NGOs to implement project. I just give an example, 2019 and 2020, we implemented a project. It was mainly actually in the Taliban areas, but partly on the government control areas. So as stated earlier, the Mine Action Program of Afghanistan is maintaining the humanitarian principles, which helped us to run that project quite successfully, establish committees from the areas under the government control, establish people or committees from the communities under the Taliban. So that became like a confidence building measure between different parties. It was a big project, over 500 deminers, and it was successfully implemented. As stated by Shafiq earlier, the mine action in Afghanistan is implemented by NGOs. And these NGOs, as it is very clear that they are non-governmental organizations and they work in different regimes in the past 30 years. So they are very well known and well respected, and they are following still the humanitarian principle, which is, I could say, a success for them to run project in different parts of the countries. Over.
Matt, maybe I could just add a brief historical note to that. When the program began in 1989-90, the UN office coordinating the UN's action negotiated what was known as the humanitarian consensus. And this was an understanding with both the then pro-Soviet government in Kabul and with all the different Mujahideen parties based mainly in Peshawar and Quetta. And this was that the activities that were defined within the humanitarian program could be undertaken everywhere where the need was established according to the greatest need. That they would facilitate travel between the various areas and the activities that would be required. And one of the most important elements of that discussion was to get all the parties' agreement that mine risk education and mine clearance and minefield survey should be included as part of the humanitarian program, of the understanding of what was included within the humanitarian program. And at that time, I think we all felt that was a bit of a breakthrough, but it's been tremendously important, not only in Afghanistan, but in many other countries around the world, that this understanding that humanitarian mine action is part of a set of humanitarian programs which should be encouraged and supported by all parties to a conflict. that this has been maintained.
Just to add, sorry if time allows. So if there are issues in areas under the control of the Taliban, normally en masse through UNAMA and OCHA, who has regular contacts with Taliban, for example, in Doha, the issues has been discussed if it's relevant to the mine action. If there are, we had few deminers kidnapped by Taliban, and then through those channels of UN, those issues were discussed, and it resulted in releasing of the deminers and releasing the equipments of the demining personnel. So that setup is quite working well so far through UN dealing with the non-state armed groups, specifically Taliban. Over.
Thank you very much. Celine, you had a question. Celine Cheng.
Yes, sorry, thank you so much. So I'm Celine, I'm the Explosive Ordnance Risk Education Specialist working for Humanity and Inclusion. I had a very operational question actually related to the case study that was presented by Danish Refugee Council about the homes, about clearing the homes that were constructed in part by ARW. We're always looking for ways to link mine action with other sectors, such as cash transfer, for example. So I was wondering if there were any publications linked to lessons learned and best practices from this project, as well as whether any kind of consideration was given in the perspective of the do no harm approach. So for example, by giving cash transfers to those who had constructed using explosive remnants of war, was there any fear about encouraging unsafe behavior in other areas or communities? Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. I think the project is still ongoing. We've cleared about 30 or 40 out of the 100 or so houses that have this issue. It is a concern for us. I think it's very specific and very unusual. It's not necessarily. We haven't found any link with encouraging risky behavior. In fact, our kind of clearance and rebuilding of their houses have encouraged other community members to come forward who were previously reluctant about telling us about this issue for fear of having their homes destroyed or some kind of consequence. But it certainly would be a very interesting study to look at that more closely and to bring our risk education and our monitoring and evaluation teams in to make that connection and see if it exists between cash transfers and encouraging unsafe behavior as a result.
Arawind, we are approaching, I'm afraid, the end, but we have a little bit of time left. Arawind, do you have your question, please?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Matz, and thank you to all panelists. I base my question based on my experience with Indian Army because I served there for 11 years. And the question I put was using the capability of armed forces towards this demining ops. Because all through my career, whenever the question of Afghanistan keep coming to us, like due to the geopolitics, India was not keen on giving some kind of offensive capabilities or stuff to things like that to Afghan National Defense Forces. But when you look at demining ops, it has got a different perception towards as a humanitarian role. And if you ask donor countries to send a huge hundreds of thousands of peacekeepers, they may not be able to do, but they can send small cohorts of deminers who can be used to build the capability of the Afghanistan or any other conflict affected country. And also they have the expertise, and different countries, depending upon their economy and their relevance of their military policy, they have a huge capability, technology, and things like that. So would any of the panelists can tell me like how it can be done? Is it possible, or like it's, yeah? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting question there on tapping into that expertise. I don't know who wants to respond to that. Sohaila as well. I'm conscious you may want to comment on some of these questions, but Shafiq and perhaps Martin as well, and indeed Daniel. I don't know who wants to start.
Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead, Shafiq. Go ahead, Shafiq. Yes.
So can you please repeat the question again? I didn't get the last point. Do you say that what is the role of troop contributing nations to Afghanistan in terms of capacity development, something like that?
No, because my question was to be specific. The contributing troops for peacekeeping roles has got its own dynamics of geopolitics. But here, the demining operations should be looked from a humanitarian role, because it's not only affecting the combatants or non-state actors, but it's widely affecting the common people and their livestock and source of their livelihood. So a country which can have a different geopolitical interest, per se, like in Afghanistan, can very well contribute to demining ops, because it is a humanitarian. I see it as a humanitarian role. So, and armed forces, they have huge expertise. So is it feasible to tap it into their expertise and things in this parlance?
Oh, yeah, I think I got the point. So the troop contributing nations, they have provided lots of support financially and also in terms of capacity development of humanitarian demining. In addition to that, countries which they have sent their troops to Afghanistan, they have trained some people within the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Interior, specifically in terms of clearing landmines and IEDs in different parts of the country. And they had schools in Afghanistan which continually providing such a training. In terms of equipment and finance, they also provided assistance to humanitarian mine action MAPA organizations like DDG, DRC, and other organizations. Some of that money has been used for capacity development. But one thing that should be noted, the military people cannot provide direct training to humanitarian demining organizations in order to avoid any harm to the neutrality of those organizations. But their money which they provide, it is being used for training of organizations. I hope I was able to answer the question.
Martin, do you want to add to that? Yeah.
Yes. No, I mean, just to reinforce what Shafiq just said, when I was in charge of the UN Mine Action Service in New York, covering the global operations of UNMAS, this was a very sensitive and important issue, and we constantly supported the distinction between support for humanitarian mine action programs and the activities of peacekeepers, even if, as UNMAS, we worked with both. So it's really important to maintain that distinction. And I think it's also important to see each operation in its very specific context, because an activity that might be understood as benefiting one party to the conflict in one situation might not have the same implication in another situation. So I think it's really important when considering ideas like this to consider the context. And also perhaps one other point, the demining program, the mine action program in Afghanistan has developed an understanding about its own context and the kinds of activities that can be beneficial, which is much greater than that of so-called experts coming in from other countries very often. And I think, and this doesn't just simply apply to Afghanistan, of course. Sometimes the people who learn most from the advice of the international experts can be the international experts because they're learning a lot from the local deminers who have worked out what the best techniques are in their situation.
Thank you very much for that, that Martin. It's a very good point. We have a final question, I think. Julia.
Yeah, I just wanted to come, thank you for the brilliant presentation. And I just wanted to come with one question to Suhaila. I've been in Afghanistan in 2018, and probably communication with female deminers is one of the most inspiring things I've ever experienced. And what is your experience as Afghan woman? Tell us, like, just a briefly concluding remark, working in a very male, still traditionally male-dominated humanitarian mine action.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Leo, for the questions. Well, I have been working at the UN Mass, or my first experience being in this sector is from UN Mass. And I personally have been in contact and interviewed the female deminers many times. And they are very, very strong personalities, very strong women, and with a great love to their country. So I believe if a woman decides to work as a deminer, it really means that they really want to see their homeland safe from the mines. So one of the major things that I noticed in them, or many other, for example, we have a big portion of female risk education officers. They also have a very challenging job to go to the communities and provide and deliver risk education messages. And my experience is that women are not given very easy jobs. It's challenging jobs to be a woman and to work in mine action sector. But despite of that, all the opportunities and responsibilities given to women in mine action, it has been a success. It has not been any failure. And as the study also showed, that the productivity rate of women working in this sector are no less than men. So personally, my impression is that women are the crucial part of mine action in the success of mine action sector. It's not nothing but help and significant help and need for the women in mine action. And I hope in the future the rate of female staff in MAPA increases, as so far it has been helpful for this program. Thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much. I think we have to bring proceedings to an end. I think it's been an absolutely terrific session. I keep thinking of one of the slides you had, Shafiq, of that family where all the children had suffered directly from the scourge of landmines. And I think that picture itself is testimony to the importance of the work that you're all doing. So I'm extremely grateful that you've taken time out to share your experiences with us, Martin, Shafiq, Suhaila, and Daniel. And I also want to reiterate a special thanks again to Julia for conceiving of this idea of this session, and deciding to organizing. And perhaps this is something we should be doing every year, every beginning of April, to mark the importance of this subject. So once again, thank you so much, everyone. And I hope to be able to invite you back to do this again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mary, for moderating.
Thank you, everyone. Very interesting.